Typical hazardous substances. The first one I want to talk about is mold. First of all, I'd be very careful about using the word mold. Many times when we go into something and we see or we hear a complaint of mold, many times it's mildew and it's not mold. The only time you can tell if it's mold is if you actually test for it. And that may be necessary. And we want to know if it's mold, and we want to handle it accordingly if it's mold, and we want to understand the health effects that that mold can have. And so the key thing we want to understand there is buildings sealed to prevent heat and cooling loss host the perfect mold growth environment. So limited airflow. You have to have some sort of condensation or moisture in order for it to grow. They like dark. Mold likes dark places. We find this a lot of times with poorly installed stucco or stucco that's damaged or leaking. And then once water gets in, it's trapped in there. And so mold loves temperatures between 40 and 80 degrees and relatively humidity around 55 degrees. And so you can create a situation where mold can grow and do very well in those types of situations. Another one that you see with mold that people sometimes get is in when leaves have been stacked up for a long period of time and there's been moisture under there for a long period of time at the right temperatures, it can start to grow as well. So HVAC systems are a major culprit of this, and then obviously leaky roofs and things like that. So we want to watch out for mold, take it seriously, but do know that there is a way to handle it, and so would encourage you to watch for that one. The next one is carbon monoxide. The way that we deal with carbon monoxide is we actually have carbon monoxide in all of our residential and commercial. We have sensors to measure the carbon monoxide to tell us if it's there. It is a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas, one of the most common and deadly poisons in our environment. And so we want to be very careful with it. We designate it as CO, and it is a byproduct of incomplete burning of fossil fuels like gas, oil, coal, wood, and it's used in engines, oil burners. We find it in gas fires, hot water heaters, open fires, and things like that. So what happens is the CO displaces oxygen cells in our bloodstream, and it affects the functions of our heart, brain, and neurological systems, and so it can cause death. So it's something that we need to take very seriously, and the best way to do that is to have a sensor because it is odorless, and so it's dangerous, and so we need to watch for that one. CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, manufactured inert, non-toxic, non-flammable chemicals, gases used primarily as refrigerants. These can leak from air conditioners, refrigerators, and freezers, float into different cleaning solutions, and once they're released from their original containers, they float into the air and may survive for a long, long time, like 150 years. So we want to be careful with these and deal with them accordingly. It talks a little bit about how to do that in the book. It talks about contacting local public works departments and ask about home appliance recycling because they will have CFCs in them. Inform local haulers and service personnel if we have a problem with them. So be careful with those. The next one on the list we have is PCBs. Polychlorinated biphenyls are more than 200 chemical compounds not found in nature. Because they are flame resistant, they are used in many consumer products. Transformers is where we see these mostly. Lubricating oils, caulking, we'll see them in caulk. Electrical motors and refrigerators, even bread wrappers can have PCBs. Between 1930 and 1970, over 1.4 billion pounds of PCBs were manufactured in the United States alone. So there's a lot of these out there, and you will see people talk about PCBs and the effect that they have, and so I would have you take a look at that. The next one is asbestos. This is probably more common that you're going to run into asbestos. in asbestos, we have to watch out in several areas. Asbestos is used for an insulation, and so we'll see it actually in insulation, and so you have to be careful with that. When it's encapsulated, it's not necessarily a problem, but when it becomes a problem is when it gets released into the air. So that's what we really want to be careful about, is anytime, for instance, there are asbestos tiles on the outside of some older homes, and if we remove those, we have to be very careful, and there's a process for taking care of them when we remove them, and careful not to get it into the air, and to wear proper masks whenever doing that work. The other one that you'll see them is it's an insulation on piping. You'll see them sometimes. Again, they're not dangerous unless it is released into the air. Then you'll see it in insulation. You'll also see it in some tile products. So be careful with asbestos and just have respect for it and take care of it. The next one, radon, you will see it's an invisible, odorless, tasteless radioactive gas that occurs in small amounts almost everywhere, but primarily we see it underground in basements and other enclosed structures, and it's known to cause lung cancer. So radon is the easiest to mitigate by sealing the property and installing PVC pipes to get rid of it, putting a fan in it to suck up the vapors. So watch for radon. It can be tested for. The next one on the list is underground storage tanks. One of the things that we do during what we call a phase one is we look at the use of the property, and one of the uses that we're going to be looking for is any kind of an underground tank, and primarily those are petroleum tanks, but there can be others. But one of the ones we worry a lot about are chemicals, plating companies, paint manufacturers, anything like that that has underground tanks in which they store chemicals. And obviously the problem there is if those tanks would leak. And so a lot of times those tanks were made out of steel, and the moisture from the ground coming up or down will cause them to rust, and once they rust, then they tend to leak, and when they leak, they get into the soil. So what we have to do is when we remove underground tanks, we have to continuously test the soil below the tanks to make sure that there was none released. And we do that in a phase one, phase two, phase three process of checking environment. Okay, so that's underground tanks. Formaldehyde, best known as a volatile organic compound, VOC. Formaldehyde is implicated as a cause of many indoor air quality complaints. It's colorless, organic chemical that usually has a very strong, pronounced odor, so you will probably know if you have formaldehyde. We thought that this chemical was harmless, and it was widely used in inexpensive preservation, that when you're preserving something or bonding something in home insulation even, and some things like that, it was used, paneling, fiberboard, and so formaldehyde foam insulation is something that you will see. So formaldehyde is an irritant to the eye, nose, and throat. You get symptoms such as a headache, wheezing, coughing, fatigue, skin irritation, and such. So it is classified as a probable human carcinogen. So formaldehyde is found extensively throughout buildings. So just watch for that and know that it exists. And the last one is probably the most that we get involved as property managers, and that is lead-based paint. Until 1978, lead-based paint was banned, but until that time, it was used in paints primarily. That's where you would see it. It's absorbed by humans. Excessive lead levels can affect and damage the brain, the kidneys, and the nervous system, and especially under children under 5 years old is generally when we see the effects of lead, and it's measured by blood test, and so that's how we know if people have had exposure to lead. So you have to, if you're dealing with a property that was built before 1978, you have to disclose that it may have lead-based paint, and you have to disclose if you have tested for lead-based paint or if you know that there's any in there. And then you have to give a pamphlet based on lead-based paint. So that's how we handle that. So that's sort of an overview of the environmental issues in the chapter, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you very much.